All right, let's do another discussion about a specific argument for the upcoming topic, January, February. This time we're going to be going in to talk about just generally more civilian deaths. This is definitely going to share some overlap with the escalation arguments that we've already talked about because they're accessing very similar type of impacts and even doing it through somewhat similar type of warrants, but they're going to be approaching it in a somewhat different way, and it's different enough that I feel like we should discuss it in a new forum. So that's exactly what we're going to do here. But on that note, as always, what we're going to be doing is just talk about general idea behind the argument, values and value criteria that can be used with it, rebuttals, and then ending with my personal thoughts on the argument. So, getting started, let's just talk about what the general idea of the argument is. So, this one, as I talked about, is somewhat similar to the escalation argument. Generally, the idea behind it is that, obviously, as you could tell, lethal autonomous weapons are going to lead to more civilian deaths. Now, the reasoning behind this comes with the fact there's actually several different warrants that can be attributed to this, and a lot of them are going to come in other arguments that we're going to talk about later, but just essentially this idea that we're going to be abusing lethal autonomous weapons to do, be more aggressive in war, because although there is the benefit of now we don't have to have as many soldiers in war, this idea that we don't have to send troops overseas is a good one for us at least, but it's bad for countries in where the wars are being fought, which I think is something that people often forget about sometimes in America, because we haven't had a war fought on our soil and God knows how long. The Spanish American War, I guess, Mexican American War. I don't know which one came first. One of those two, I think. Um, but that's been over 100 years now, so obviously people are not used to in America. And this idea of wars being fought here at our home. But that is the reality for a lot of people. So although we're not sending our troops over to a fight in these wars, we're still having these drones going to do something, or drones. Maybe it's whatever form of lethal autonomous weapon. Excuse me. We have. And there's going to be consequences to those actions. And since we no longer have to put our own people at risk, we're going to be sending more and more of the lethal autonomous weapons over, which is going to result in more and more violence than we would be able to do with our own troops. Also, I'm using us to refer to the United States as it's just an easy example, but obviously this issue is not unique to us, and it's whatever nation has lethal autonomous weapons, so on and so forth. I don't really feel like that's I feel like that's pretty obvious, but just wanted to clarify. Um, but anyway, obviously, as we have more and more of those, you could even argue that we're going to see um, like drone on drone warfare, or as always with whatever type of lethal autonomous weapons we have, which is going to reduce deaths. But there are definitely going to be some civilians who start to feel the effects of this warfare. And then the argument is that because the battles are becoming more and more intense, we're going to see more and more deaths. This is different from the miscalculation argument, which I know they seem very similar, as we already talked about, or just general escalation argument, because it's like the intention of the action, right? Because in escalation, it's arguing that we're not necessarily using these for war anyway, but it might lead to more war, which is going to result in more deaths. This one is saying that it's going to make wars that are already going to happen worse. So there's a difference in uniqueness, right? Because for this one, your uniqueness is just that civilians don't die too much in war, but you can concede that wars are going to happen. Whereas the other one is harder to prove but higher impact, because it's saying we're going to cause wars itself, and obviously that's much worse than this idea that more civilians are going to die in already terrible conflicts, because civilians are going to die in either of them, but this one is going to result in a smaller increase than the other argument. That's the main difference beyond those, which of course then leads us to our impacts that we already talked about, which is things such as saving lives, which can easily lead us into our value and value criterion. So with the value and value criterion here, we're accessing the same ones for a lot of these arguments, which of course is because partially just because of my bias as someone who is I don't know that I've ever ran a Kantian framework. I toyed with the idea on the nuclear weapons topic, but I don't think I ever pulled the trigger and did it myself. So, but as a result, we're definitely going to talk about a lot of consequentialist frameworks, and this is another example of that. You're definitely going to want to be opting to a consequentialist framework if you're using this, because literally you're just saying that we need to be protecting these people's lives. So, value criterion things such as protecting lives or just generally maximizing well-being, protecting human rights, all those ideas that we've been talking about for every single argument, it can definitely be applied here once again. So maybe like use the value of life or something, and then the value criterion to maximizing well-being. I don't know. It could be whatever pair you want, as long as you're getting in that consequentialist ideal. And as always, if you have some like unique second argument or contention that's going with this one, it's probably going to be more heavily dictated by that second contention, as that one, if it can't access certain value criterions, then you're going to want to obviously try and pick ones that one can get access to. Just that way your case can be more holistic and you can use the different arguments that you want. And luckily this one has a lot of like, I don't want to say leeway, but it can work with a lot of different values and value criterion, so you don't have to worry too much about it with this one. As for responses to this, I think generally you can just hit it with a non-uniqueness argument. Obviously, they're arguing that we're going to see an increase in deaths, but you can just be like, man, there's already a lot of civilian deaths from warfare already. So, like, very clearly, we're not going to see, like, this benefit because, like, things are already bad. How are they going to get that much worse? You could also talk about how just generally we're going to reduce deaths because we are going to see, like, less soldiers dying. And yes, I know this argument is about civilians, but just like, especially if their value criterion is something to do with life, then you can just be like, well, sure, civilians are important, but so are soldiers, and we're reducing soldier deaths, which overall is a reduction in deaths. You can also talk about, which is something that we're going to get more in depth with on the negative side whenever we discuss this argument itself. But you could talk about how like civilians are going to be better off with lethal autonomous weapons, and that's because like soldiers do a lot of bad things sometimes, and sometimes will commit war crimes, and we could talk about them just like killing civilians for some reason, and there's a lot of that going on. But there's also a lot of rape and like other bad stuff in those areas too. So definitely there's a lot of things you could hit on that note, where it's just like soldiers are going to make this situation much worse because like if things are, there's certain things obviously that drones aren't going to do, or whatever lethal autonomous weapons. So like, yeah, they could potentially result in more deaths, but it's unlikely, and also they're not going to do these other atrocious acts that soldiers do, in addition to just straight up killing people for like no real reason. So you kind of got we talked about like a deny where it's just generally like no. We talked about kind of a turn where we're saying that we're going to reduce it. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot you can do on this impact here, because there's no way you can say that civilian deaths like don't matter. So there's that. At least they have that going for them on this argument. But like otherwise, yeah, just attacking those links, because this one, unless once again, unless I'm missing something and someone brings forth an amazing argument, it seems like the links aren't overly strong. So I would just like focus my efforts there. As for my personal thoughts on this argument, once again, I think the general impact is good, but I just once again think that there are better forums to access this impact on this topic, right? Because like life and death is essentially going to be everything on this topic. So why constrain yourself to this like hyper specific one where it's like we have to prove that we're going to see more? It just seems that like if you want this impact, you can get it in a much more believable method, do escalation, and you can get it with a much higher magnitude, because more, well, I guess that wouldn't be magnitude. It would be scope. Yeah, because more people are going to be affected by it than just like, oh, the small group of people that like just happen to increase in their numbers, right? So it's like, why would you just put yourself in the situation with the worst impacts and the worst links? It's, you just have better opportunity, right? And maybe I'm just somewhat biased because I like the miscalculation argument, because I ran it under the Jan Feb topic last year, which was nuclear weapons. So maybe that's just my personal bias showing. But I just definitely think that one's going to be a lot stronger than this personal one. So that's my thought process on this. I think this one is definitely one that you can pull, but I don't really see the point in it. personally. But anyway, that's really all I have to say on this argument. As always, I think it's just important to understand the rebuttals, even if you don't like it yourself. So it was still good that we got to have a little talk about it. But as always, I hope this video was educational for you guys, and I wish you guys good luck in all your rounds.